Hi, everybody. Welcome back. My name is Wiley Larson with ASU Entrepreneurship and Innovation. I am your program manager and one of your instructors here for Venture Development School. We welcome you to Unit 4 of the Venture Development School test class, which is one of my favorite topics, revenue streams. And so as we go through today, I can't start without the obligatory Jerry Maguire show me the money slide, which is one of the most important and key factors in having a startup company, is how do we make a sustainable company, whether it's for profit or nonprofit or more than profit. We have to figure out a way to pay the bills and keep the lights on and hopefully pay the founders in a way that can keep us sustainable and keep us in business. So with that, we're going to talk about some of the key questions here about revenue streams. And some of these questions are a little bit fuzzy because they really go back to some of the questions that maybe we didn't have a very clear understanding of when we started this process. What value is the customer paying for? We've kind of had a fuzzy idea about what value is. And what we talked about in our value propositions lecture was that value propositions are the reasons that they're our competitive advantage and the reasons why our customers buy from us instead of somebody else. So that's one of the key things we're going to think about when we talk about revenues. How much are they currently paying to receive comparable value? That's one of the key questions we're going to talk about today. We also want to discover how much our customers would be willing to pay, and we also want to know how much they would like to pay. Now, when we're starting a business from the ground up, these are all things that we can start to formulate and put together on our own so that once we get to the point where we're ready to start selling product and ready to get revenue coming in the door, we can put together a model that makes sense for the customers that we're going to be serving. This is one of the key errors, one of the key problems, one of the main reasons why startups fail is they don't have a well thought out plan for bringing in money. And it's also one of the reasons why many different startups don't ever get out of the gate or they don't get funding. So those are some of the things we're going to talk about this afternoon. Our objectives: we want to figure out how we capture value from our customers. And in most cases, that's revenue, that's monetary value. But in some cases, we may have some other ideas about how we can get value back from our customers in forms that aren't necessarily monetary. Another objective for this particular part of the box, this part of the business model canvas, is we want to encourage you to validate or reject as many possible different business models as possible. If you go through the business model generation book by Alexander Osterwilder, you'll see the first 40 or 50 pages talks about the canvas, but then the rest of the book talks about different ways that startups and small companies have found ways to capture value and capture revenue or form business models around their ideas or their technology. So would really encourage you to go back to that book and look through the back 3/4 of that book and read about those different business models that are demonstrated there. We also want to be able to walk us through a typical sale. So in your mind, what's your hypothesis for how you get awareness from your customer, like we talked about in the channels lecture, but also how do you get all the way to the point where that customer is ready to pull the trigger? And so we want to think about some of those things as we explore our revenue streams today as well. So one of the startups that we talked about in one of the previous lessons was a drone service for the agriculture industry. So as we think about revenue, we have to think about the value that we're providing to the customer. Really, in essence, what value are they paying for? We're hopefully providing a value that's much, much better than any of our competitors can provide to that same customer. So in that sense, having the less expensive version of the same solution really isn't the goal that we want to think about. We want to think about how much better can we perform a solution than any of the other competitors that we're up against. So as we talk about reasons why a customer would want to use a drone service for their agriculture business, we look at some of these value propositions, and I remind you that for one of those reasons, for orchards and tree crop farmers, we found that 6% better yields in almonds was a really, really good value proposition for those almond growers. But we also think about what's a more disruptive value is that when they did the same process with cherry orchards, they found that they were able to get 15 times better yields using their process with cherries. We found that that's really a disruptive value. So what we've provided here is a good value for almond farmers, but for cherry farmers, it's a disruptive solution. When we talk about how the drone is much better for checking fields than, say, an ATV or a four-wheeler, we talked initially about how 20 miles per hour versus 50 miles per hour is a good numeric value proposition. So if we're on a four-wheeler and we're driving across the field in our ATV, we can probably bump along at about 20 miles per hour, whereas that drone can fly and get that same data at 200 feet in the air at about 50 miles per hour. So we know that we've saved time with that value proposition. But with a little bit of creativity and a little bit of mathematics, we were able to also figure out that if an agronomist is sitting on that four-wheeler and can see a range of about 6 feet or 5 feet on either side of his four-wheeler, he can really only cover about 5 acres per hour using that four-wheeler. However, if we're talking about a drone at 200 feet above the air, providing digital pictures to the agronomist, we can actually cover the entire field, possibly, at 640 acres per hour. So if we use that number, we have a much higher value. The third value proposition on this list, and reason why we might want to use a drone instead of a ATV for checking our crops, is we said that using a drone, you might be able to have easier access to remote areas of your farm. So our hypothesis, our guess at that value proposition was potentially, say, 23% of wheat acres in Montana are inaccessible by a pickup truck, which is good. That's great. That's a good number that we can start with as a value proposition for that particular customer segment. But if we drill down a little bit and look at some of the mathematics and do a little bit of research, what you can actually find out here is that 76% of wheat acres in Montana are more than 15 minutes from the farm office. If that's the value that we're advertising, that's a much more powerful number. And if we can provide a better value or a better number, we can also charge a higher price. And the last example that we talked about, identifying powdery mildew fungus 3 days earlier with ultraviolet cameras, that's a good value proposition. We've assigned a number to that fact that a drone can see this fungus on lettuce crops with a UV camera 3 days before a farmer can see it with the naked eye. But what we might be able to extrapolate from that value is that if we can catch that fungus 3 days earlier, we can actually use just a fraction of the fungicide that we would have to use if it was a much more progressed state of the fungus. So maybe we save 90% of the cost of the fungicide because we used that UV camera. And that gives us a value that's really disruptive. So as we start to think about revenues, the whole point of this slide is to say that as we go through this course and we think about the numeric reason why we might want to have, why a customer might want to buy from us rather than another competitor, we have to think about creatively, how can we make those numbers look as disruptive as we possibly can? which then allows us not just to be the low-cost competitor, but it actually allows us to be able to charge a premium price. So before we get too deep into the revenue streams, I'd really encourage you to just pause the video for 5 or 10 minutes and look at your value propositions and look at the numbers that you've assigned to those value propositions in that top center box of your canvas, and think about how disruptive are my numbers? How can I go out to my customers and interview them and find out what really moves the needle in terms of finding a great value proposition that you can turn around and sell? So think about that. We'll give you a couple minutes to do that, and then you can start the video up here and we'll take the next step. So with revenue streams, you need strategies and you need tactics. Strategies may involve direct sales or licensing or other ideas about how you generate revenue. Tactics are a little more granular. They're fees, they're subscriptions, they're little ways that we can incrementally increase the amount of revenue that we get from each of our customers. And some of the feedback and one of the comments that I get after we talk about the customer relationships part of the canvas and now in the revenue streams part of the canvas, a lot of people raise their hand and say, you know what, I'm actually kind of uncomfortable with that. I as a customer don't like to be upsold or cross-sold, and so as a business owner, I don't really want to use those types of strategies that are nickel and diming my customers to death. And my response to that is twofold. If we're going to be serious about starting this company, you have to have a very open mind in terms of not only how you think you should sell your product to your customer, but how your customer wants to be sold. And even though we talk a little bit about upselling and cross-selling and sometimes get a little bit uncomfortable with that, what that does is provides a lot of flexibility to our customers about what parts of the solution that they really need and really are willing to pay for. So as we think about direct sales, we think about licensing, which are the big strategies, and the tactics like upselling and cross-selling and fees and subscriptions and freemium and those other types of tactics. Not only are you giving yourself an opportunity to grow that revenue with a particular customer, but you're also offering them flexibility, which ultimately will help you keep that customer, which as we know is way, way less expensive than trying to find a new one. So keep that in mind and keep an open mind as you're talking about how can I generate revenue streams from my solution. Now, when we start talking about revenue streams, and again, this is the first time we've really talked about this subject, we want to think about and remember that all of these are hypotheses. We have some ideas about how we might charge, but at the end of the day, because we're just starting this company, we have a lot of flexibility about how we can approach our customers and say, you know, interview them about how do they prefer to pay for the things that they purchase. Every organization and every individual is going to have a different preferred method that makes it most convenient for them to pay their bills on time. Some people do things online. Some people use electronic funds transfer. Some people prefer the debit card. Some people want to swipe. Some people use the Square. Other people use other methods. And as a business owner, your customers are going to be the same way. Some of them may have abilities to charge for some things or to pay in some ways that other companies don't have. So we really want to think about how can we be open to the input that we get from our different customer streams about how they want to be charged. So one of the common mistakes about revenue streams that this is just the price that I charge for my solution or for my device or for my app. One of the other common mistakes is that I set the price based on what it costs me to make my product. And the third common mistake, as I mentioned in the previous slide, I should always charge less than my competitor. We're going to address all of these different mistakes as we go through this part of the canvas. So revenue streams are the strategies that I use to generate cash from each customer segment. So we brought in a little bit of green today because it's exciting for us to talk about money and being able to be compensated for the value that we provide to our customers. As we look at this particular business model canvas here, you see some examples of customer segments for a concussion device that we've talked about in previous lessons. So as we look at the different customer segments, we've got athletic trainers and sports medicine doctors. We've got clinics and urgent care doctors. We've got neurologists. We've got mixed martial arts trainers, sports agents, fire department EMTs, chiropractors, injury attorneys, and we've even added school athletic directors as potential customers for our concussion diagnostic device. Now, what we've learned from doing customer discovery with this particular startup is that this is a pretty wide and diverse list of possible customers. And so we need to think about what makes the most sense in terms of how we charge each of these customers for the ability to use our concussion test. So one of the strategies or one of the revenue streams is selling our device. That's something that's pretty common or pretty makes sense, I think, to most of us, is selling the device that diagnoses the concussion. We may want to implement a pay per scan option so that every time we run that test, the company that has this concussion device gets paid for doing the scan. We may want to do a site license option where a particular organization can run an unlimited number of scans for a basic set price. In some cases, we may be able to provide expert witness or affidavit. You can probably guess which customer segment that's going to be for, as a value to the customer segment and how they use the data. So as we start to point to some of these, device sales from our customer discovery makes a lot of sense for clinics and urgent care doctors, chiropractors, and school athletic directors because these customer segments have budgets for equipment. And so in this particular case, that is a way that they are used to doing business. So device sales makes a lot of sense for those different customer segments. On a pay per scan basis, we see and have learned that athletic trainers and sports medicine doctors, clinics and urgent care doctors, neurologists, and injury attorneys all have value in what we get on a pay per scan basis. In most of those cases, it's a situation where the health insurance may be able to reimburse the clinic for each individual scan. And so for those different revenue streams, the concussion company would want to be able to gather that revenue on a pay per scan basis. As we talk about a site license for our device, the concussion device, that particular opportunity points directly to the school athletic trainers. When this company did customer discovery with school athletic directors, they found that there was a concern among those schools about their limited budgets and the fact that they didn't want to be limited by how many scans they could do for budget concerns. What made sense to them was a flat rate. We can do unlimited scans, unlimited tests for one set price. And the company who was working on this solution thought that made a lot of sense. And obviously with the expert witness or the affidavit, the injury attorneys, I think of maybe too many arrows here, but that's a way that the injury attorneys can utilize our data, and we can charge a premium price if it's something that proves that there's a concussion in the case of a car accident or something like that. So the idea being here, there are multiple different strategies for generating cash from the different customer segments. And for the startups that we're all working on, we have to think about what makes the most sense and doing customer interviews to find out how what is the easiest way for them to pay? And so I hope that makes some sense with what we've put together here. One other thing that you might want to think about is an extended warranty. For the owners of this startup, they realized that the devices were going to be out on playing fields and in locker rooms and in the rain and in the mud. And so it made a lot of sense with the athletic directors that if they purchased this device, that they would want an extended warranty to cover replacement costs. So the customer discovery process can be really, really valuable in terms of finding out how your customers want to pay you for your solution. And because you're right at the beginning of this process, you can set things up in a way that makes it easy for them to pay. There's lots and lots of other examples of this. This is just one. And certainly when you're working with your mentors and the rest of us as staff, we can give you some other examples of those particular strategies. So your homework is to answer the question, what revenue streams will you use to generate cash from each of your customer segments? And they may be, in our particular case or in the case of this concussion device, device sales, pay per scan, site license, expert witness, and extended warranties are all ways that this concussion startup can generate revenue and have a well-rounded revenue model to help them be sustainable and survive even the ups and downs of the economy and the budgets of the schools and the doctor's offices that they're working with. And for each of your customer segments and each of your businesses, you should be able to put together a list of 3 to 5 strategies, and they may be the same as the ones that are listed here, that will help you generate revenue from your different customer segments. How do we figure that out? I've said it all along. You have to go ask them, because right now you're just guessing. And until you go out and validate with the customers how they choose to pay, you're just guessing. They're just hypotheses. The way we prove our hypotheses is to go talk to the customers and find the method that is least intrusive, that's easiest for them to pay you, and that's going to give you another competitive advantage to get your startup into revenue. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we're going to walk through an example of the same concussion startup that we were talking about a little bit earlier, about how sometimes if we just take an estimated guess at a price, we could really, really undersell the value that we can capture from that customer. So with our revenue streams, direct sales and licensing strategies, we have to determine pricing, which can be fees and subscriptions and other tactics that help us capture revenue. But as we go back to our value propositions, we want to think about all of these things in the way of what really matters to the customer. And one of the common mistakes for startups that end up failing is that they really didn't charge enough for the value that they were providing to their customer segments. And we'll show you an example of the strategy that happened right here. So we've been talking about the diagnosis for concussions and about the value propositions for this. This company had a really tough time trying to figure out a numeric reason why the customer buys their particular diagnostic, because it was very binary. There were no other objective diagnostic tools to diagnose concussions on the market. So when they started brainstorming their value propositions, they simply said, the simple diagnosis of a concussion is a value proposition. Monitoring traumatic brain injury recovery could be another value proposition. And actually the long-term analysis of the effect of continuous full contact on athletes all seemed like really good value propositions, but all were value propositions that had a really difficult way to say numerically why this method was better. So as we go through this process, we're going to show you something about how sometimes through generating a revenue model, you can actually come to a really, really good value proposition for your customer. So we're back to value propositions, and as we look at the box in the top right corner in this particular box on the canvas, what do you see there? you see a gift, right? A little present. You have to think about what is the gift that you give your customer. That's the reason that icon is in that particular box. What we provide in the way of a solution to our customer is we're giving them a gift, and in return, they're hopefully giving us money, which helps us be sustainable and allows us to give gifts to other people and other customers. So as this concussion company was trying to figure out the value of the gift that they're providing to their customers, they were able to find a sample medical chart online of a concussion accident. So what you see here in this chart activity are the notes and the billing procedures for this particular concussion incident. So this started off on the 6th of July, 2009, must have been maybe a 4th of July weekend accident. And ATC stands for Athletic Trainer Certified. So there was a 10-minute consultation with a certified athletic trainer on that particular day. The trainer said, hey, you know what, we need to get you into the sports medicine clinic and find out what's going on here. Maybe it was a baseball game or a softball game. So the next day on 7/7, there was an interview that took about 40 minutes with the patient and the nurse or whoever the practitioner was at that particular time. There was also a 15-minute interview with the mom of that. So we did an interview with the mom. And so right there you've got about a 55 minutes worth of clinical time that took place for this particular accident. One of the competitors for the startup is a test called Impact. So at that point, from 10:55 to 11:25, the patient did a 30-minute test to determine what their score was on that particular subjective performance-based impact concussion test. After the test concluded at 11:30 to 11:50, there was feedback that was written down and provided to the athlete and the patient's parent. And then on the next day, there was 20 minutes of reporting time. A lot of us forget that there's a lot of paperwork and a lot of notes that have to be taken anytime that there's a doctor's visit. So 20 minutes of that time billed to the patient or billed to the insurance company. And then about a week later, on the 12th of July, there was another 20-minute consultation and test with the certified athletic trainer, and then another 20-minute test with the mom. So what we know from that particular chart is there's a lot going on here with what we assumed would be a $50 concussion test. So when we slide that out of the way, we break that down a little bit. What we find out is that using the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, the average reimbursement rates in 2010 were $153 for a psychological diagnostic interview. A neurophysiological testing by a psychologist is $100 office fee. Neuropsychological testing by a technician is billed at $67 approximately. And neurophysiological testing by a computer is actually billed at $72. And so what we were able to find out by assigning a reimbursement rate to each one of those entries on the chart activity is that the doctor's office is actually be able to charge almost $500 for that particular patient and that concussion incident. And the question that this startup asked themselves, why are we just charging $50 when the doctor's office can actually bill $470 to the insurance company? There's a lot going on here, and there's a lot of value for that one patient to the doctor's office. So the gift that this competitor provides to that doctor's office is the ability to bill at about $470. So when we started to think about this, what is the value of that test provided to that doctor's office? It's probably a lot more than the assumed price of $50 per test. Maybe the company can charge $100 for the test, maybe $200 for the test. The cost of the test did not necessarily have to reflect exactly what the CMS rates provide, where even in that sense, if the company was charging $50 for the test, the doctor's office was making money on the reimbursement. So kind of the moral of the story is that the value of this particular test, back to our value propositions again, what's the gift that this company gives the customer? It's that objective concussion diagnostics are reimbursable at $470 per incident by CPT codes 9801, 96118, 96119, and 96120. The gift that this startup gives its customer, the doctor's office, are a proven concussion test that can be billed at almost $500 per incident to the insurance company. So the assumed or the hypothesis of a testing price at $50 was way, way under what the doctor's office can bill for. So what we found out is that by getting out, doing some research, and talking to customers, it's really, really important that you don't set a price for your product early on that undersells the value of the test. And it's really important that you get out and talk to customers and you ask them, how do they want to be charged? How are they currently charging customers? How do they want to pay? And developing revenue strategies, multiple revenue strategies around how your value proposition is delivered to that customer. And we have a few little tips for that. Remember, we're still not supposed to be talking about our technology when we go out and interview these customers. So what we want to not ask is, how much would you guys pay for my device or product or method or service? What you need to ask is, tell me how you handle concussions. That's really interesting. Does insurance cover those kinds of things? How do you bill that? So as we go out and do customer discovery at this stage of the process, we're still not selling. We're still not telling people what we have or what we provide. We're just trying to find out, and watch this, we want to find out how our competitors are currently interacting with our potential customers. So the key questions for this particular example was, does insurance cover that? Oh, they do. That's great. How do you bill that? Asking these questions from a research perspective can give you some really, really great insight. And until we get out and talk to those customers, everything is just a hypothesis. Everything is just a guess. And if we're going to put this business together and be successful, we have to go out and find the data that we need that will prove to our partners and our investors and everybody that it's going to take to help us get this off the ground, that we've got a customer that's willing to pay and that they want to be billed in a certain way and that they're interested in the value proposition more than just the cost or the purchase of your product. You can get some really great additional videos and instruction on how to do this. Udacity, if you Google Udacity, Steve Blank, Lesson 6, Revenue Models, there's some great videos there. Greed is good, right? You have to think like a capitalist. You have to think about, how are the different strategies that I can implement to help me get as much revenue as I can from my existing customers? Because at the end of the day, the bottom line is we want to minimize our costs, maximize our profits, and hopefully that gives us the financial ability to go out and solve other problems for other customer segments. So greed is good. You need to think like a capitalist, and you need to be creative about how to go out and generate this revenue. Talk to competitors. As a researcher, you're just out doing research right now. You're getting ideas about how to put this particular business together. So you're even free to talk to your competitors. A lot of times you'll find people like to talk and they want to tell about tell people about their business and about their technology and about their solution. So use that to your advantage. Talk to your competitors and find out how they bill and how they collect revenue. And always remember, why are we going through this whole process? We need to figure out if this technology, if this opportunity is real, can we win, and will it be worth it? Those are 3 key questions about starting a startup. Can we win? Can we beat our competitors? Is our value proposition better than other people in the market? And do we have to lower the price so low that at the end of the day, we can't make any money and maybe it's a no-go? So keep those things in mind as you go out and do your customer discovery. If you're following the process, you should be talking to between 5 and 10 new customers between now and the next lesson, and be thinking about ways to ask them questions about how they pay your competitors now and how would they like to pay, and what are the pain points there. And perhaps you can provide not only great value in your technology, but also great value in your business model as well. Go do your homework, go do your interviews, and we'll see you next time.